Hello and welcome to this first episode of Shine with Hines, Kentucky History, Mystery, and Crime. Have you ever wondered if blue people actually exist? About people waking up in their graves? It raining meat? Or just how haunted some places in Kentucky really are? Well, then you'll love this episode, which is all about these top 10 spooky, mysterious stories and places in Kentucky. I'm Sarah Hine with Times Divine, and let's dive right in. Coming in at number 10 are devil monkeys. What are devil monkeys? Well, they're actually not a new phenomenon to the United States. There's been reported sightings from Pennsylvania to Alaska to even downtown Chicago, but for decades there have been consistent reports in the southeastern United States. So, what are they? They're said to resemble a baboon with a dog-like face. They're only like 3 or 4 feet tall. They have big bushy tails and three-toed feet. But most importantly, they have crazy strong legs compared to that of a kangaroo. So, these creatures can jump like 20 feet at a time. Sounds pretty intimidating, right? Well, in 1973, there were multiple farmers around Albany, Kentucky, who reported seeing not one, but three. And I said it, three of these beasts slaughtering their livestock. While the 1973 accounts of farmers witnessing these creatures devouring their livestock is one of the most prevalent, there are also reports of people just being out in the middle of the woods at night and witnessing creatures jumping from tree to tree. I mean, if you do find yourself in rural Kentucky, we have some 12.4 million acres of forest. So there may be an unidentified primate living in these woods. I would also make sure you say your prayers and watch your six, because these creatures can jump like 20 feet at a time. Coming in at number 9 is Kentucky Sleepy Hollow. Just to go ahead and nip this, it's not about a headless horseman. It is, however, about a dark, scary road outside Louisville, Kentucky, where it's said the hair on the back of your neck will stand up and your only light is that of the moon and the headlights of your vehicle. It's said that there's a hearse that will come out of nowhere, aggressively picking up speed to push you off the side of the road, plunging you down the 30-foot ravine that lines the road. But that's not all. There's also a bridge on this road that's called a Crybaby Bridge. And this is where decades ago, women would take their sickly or unwanted children and they would toss them off the side of the bridge, of course, plummeting to their death. But there's more. There's supposedly a time warp on this road where drivers start driving the road at one point only to exit hours later as if no time had passed. So if you find yourself on the dark, scary road of Sleepy Hollow Road outside Louisville, Kentucky, be sure to stay vigilant, watch out for hearses, don't listen to the crying babies, and maybe keep track of time. Good luck! Coming in at number 8 is Raining Meat in Kentucky. In 1876, on a March day, the Crouch family were at their family home when all of a sudden around noon, it started raining meat. Hunks of meat. No one knew what to make of this. All the locals were confused. And before you know it, it was a national frenzy. National news is reporting on it. And there's still not a clue as to why there is meat raining from the skies. There was a local hunter who said, I'm going to try this meat. Tell you what it is. So, while the residents thought it was beef, there was a local hunter who said, no, that's bear. Well, then the butcher, he was like, I'm going to try the meat, see what it is. He tried it and he said, no, that's mutton. And for those of you who don't know, mutton is a type of lamb meat. But at this point, we still don't know what the meat is, and people keep trying it. While we still don't know why the skies of Kentucky rained meat on this March day in 1876, we do have some theories. At the time, they thought it could be a Gnostic or cyanobacteria that floats in the air, and in dry conditions, you don't even really see it, but in wet conditions, can become a gelatinous, gross like material. However, the only rain that the county had seen was raining meat. So there wasn't a lot of weight in this. Another explanation for raining meat in Olympia Springs, Kentucky on this March 1876 day is that of vultures. It's said that they could have been startled or, as a defense mechanism, regurgitated everything they had eaten in the past days. And while it is common for vultures to do this, it has been observed and well documented. It is also the most widely accepted explanation for this scenario. However, there was no mention by the Crouch family or anyone else of there being an enormous amount of birds in the area, because for the amount of meat that rained on this property, it would have to be a substantial amount. However, there is another theory, and it is akin to that of the book of Exodus. Could this be divine judgment? Coming in at number 7 is Kentucky Mothman. Did you know there was a Mothman in Kentucky? Well, if you've never heard of Mothman, let's do a quick review. In 1966, there were 3 grave diggers who were working in the cemetery in West Virginia who would report the first sightings of what we now call Mothman. They reported the figure as being a brown human being who could rapidly move from tree to tree. And it was only a few days after this that in the neighboring town of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, 2 couples had a 6 or 7 foot creature appear before the vehicle they were all sitting in. And not only was it a large creature, it had a huge wingspan, bright red wide set eyes, and an apparent need to get out of the lights of the headlight of the vehicle. All 4 people in the vehicle all agreed that when this creature ran on the ground, it was clumsy. But as soon as it opened up its wings, with a span of like 10 feet, it flew so fast that it was guessed going 100 miles per hour. And as you can expect, skepticism grew within this small Appalachian town. Reporters were simply calling it a bird or a mysterious creature. However, they did include one quote from a man saying that it looked like a man with wings. But that doesn't stop the story, or we wouldn't be talking about it. More and more of these sightings continued, and so began the legend of Mothman. According to the Gettysburg Times, there were 8 more sightings within 3 days. And of those 8, 2 were volunteer firefighters who reported seeing a very large bird with large red eyes. But after about a year of the initial sightings and what had brought so much attention to Point Pleasant, West Virginia, another startling event occurred. It was on the Silver Bridge, which is a bridge that connects Point Pleasant, West Virginia to, hopefully don't slaughter this, Gallipolis, Ohio, over the Ohio River. It's said that a chain supporting the bridge suddenly snapped, causing the bridge to crumble, and for all the pedestrians and vehicles on the bridge, they were all plummeted into the icy Ohio River below. This bridge collapse caused 46 people to lose their lives for one reason or another, but not just that. This was the second major and bizarre thing to put Point Pleasant on the map within a year. So, this caused people to start connecting the dots. And later on, in 1975, author John Keel did just that in his book, The Mothman Prophecies. So, you may be asking yourself, what does this have to do with Kentucky? Well, we know at least 100 people claim to have seen Mothman in around Point Pleasant, West Virginia from 1966 to 1967. However, encounters with Mothman-like creature are certainly not limited to West Virginia. And for those of you who may not be too familiar with geography, Kentucky and West Virginia are actually bordering states. So, This brings me to Ashland in Elizabethtown, Kentucky. In 1938, there are reported sightings of a large, black, human-like being with a huge wingspan and bright red, wide-set eyes. While we know most of these sightings occurred on and along the Appalachian Mountains, in Kentucky, these sightings largely died out by 1939. Until 2008, when a Kentucky farmer by the name of Harley Foster reported a bird-like monster with bright red eyes on his property near his barn. Once the creature was acknowledged and himself, it started chasing him. I mean, could you imagine just like minding your own business, tending to your farm, and then all of a sudden you not only see this creature, but it starts chasing you? No, thank you. So what is Mothman? Was Mothman in Kentucky before West Virginia? Let me know what you think. But there are some claims to the origination of Mothman. One, some people believe that it is simply a genetically mutated large crane. Others believe it's a demon incarnate. But most widely believed is that Mothman sightings are an omen of doom. To quote KentuckyMysteries.com, when Mothman sightings largely dissipated in Kentucky in 1939, people thought it a precursor to war in Europe. In 1967, it foretold the Silver Bridge collapse. But what about in 2008? Was it all the tornadoes that ripped through the United States, or the earthquakes that hit China or Japan, or the hurricane that devastated Haiti, or any one of the 5 major hurricanes that wreaked havoc that year? Guess that would all be in who you ask. But next time someone tells you that Mothman is just in West Virginia, you can tell them there's a Kentucky legend as well. I mean, we do have the Appalachian Mountains in common, and it's very possible that Mothman went from Kentucky to West Virginia. Coming in at number 6, we have the Kentucky Gates of Hell. This is considered to be one of the most haunted places in Kentucky, which really speaks volumes considering we have Waverly Hills Sanatorium as well. So what makes this place so haunted? So the Kentucky Gates of Hell are located at Casey Cemetery outside Elizabethtown, Kentucky. And this cemetery is filled with dozens of unidentified graves from the 17 and 1800s. And while a lot of the history for Casey Cemetery is that of oral history, after referencing the Oral History Project in Kentucky, most of it has been lost to Alzheimer's. However, I was able to find some accounts of what happens when we go there. And what people talk about the most are electronics not working, vehicles not working, hearing screams and shadowy figures. And one time there was supposedly a green orb that was just floating around in the cemetery, hovering, and then all of a sudden it shot into the sky and disappeared. So, what was this in the cemetery? The official website of the Casey Cemetery also says, don't rely on your electronics because they won't work. Which kind of makes sense if you are relying on your cell phone. It is kind of out in the country. However, your vehicle not working, that's something else. Said to be a place of witchcraft, sacrifices, and satanic rituals for decades, and some claim till this day. Be careful if you want to go hang out at Casey Cemetery. Watch out for screams, orbs, and shadowy figures. Are you brave enough to visit Casey Cemetery, the Kentucky Gates of Hell? Coming in at number 5 is the story of twice buried Octavia Hatcher. And this is certainly a story with zombie-like appeal. While the people affected weren't actually dead and returned as zombies, it sure seemed that way. In 1889, in a small coal mining town in Kentucky called Pikeville, James Hatcher, a wealthy and successful businessman, moved to the area and soon married his young wife named Octavia Smith. Shortly after they got married, she became pregnant and gave birth to a baby boy. However, at this time, infant mortality rate was exceptionally high, and many children didn't make it to the age of 10. Unfortunately, Octavia and James were no exception in this, and their son, Jacob, sadly died. Octavia was unable to cope with the loss of her son. She was becoming more and more depressed and eventually became so ill that she fell into a coma for which she couldn't be awakened. So on May 2nd, 1891, she was pronounced dead from unknown causes. So, mind you, at this point, when Octavia died in 1891, it was uncommon practice to embalm bodies before burial. So, since it had been an abnormally warm spring that year and embalming wasn't common practice, James Hatcher wanted to waste no time in burying her. I mean, understandable, right? I mean, warm spring, no embalming, decomposition. It's almost more respectful that he was like not going to waste any time and bury his young wife who had succumbed to her illness at the loss of their son. But several days later, other people in the town started exhibiting similar symptoms as Octavia. Some were waking up after only days. So, this made him wonder what had happened to his young wife. Wasting no time, he went straight to getting an emergency exhumation to unbury his wife, only to find a traumatic and horrific scene. She had indeed woken up in her grave. It wasn't airtight, and there's no telling how long she spent clawing at the top of her coffin with bloody nails ripping the lining of the coffin, I'm sure screaming at the top of her lungs, before she finally did die in her coffin. Once they uncovered her, they saw this horror-stricken look frozen to her face. The blood had dried under her fingernails, and this stuck with James forever. Mortified by the scene of opening his wife's coffin and finding out that she had been buried alive, James Hatcher developed a pretty understandable phobia of being buried alive, so he created his own casket. It had latches on the inside and had to be sealed with a special tool that wasn't removed until the body was buried. So how does this happen in a small Kentucky town where Octavia Hatcher was perceived dead, buried alive, only to awake in her grave, where she later died, and was buried again? Well, there are two reasons for this. The first is medical technology at the time was not quite that advanced, so it's possible that Octavia's breathing became so shallow when she went into a comatose state that she was perceived to be dead, and she wasn't responsive, so they went with she was dead. And the second part of this, and the factor that resulted in Octavia being buried alive, is the result of a fly. Turns out the sleeping sickness that had hit this small town in Kentucky was the result of a fly bite. Yes, a fly bite. It's called a tsetse fly. Have you ever heard of this? Because I had not before this story, and I had no idea that there was a type of fly bite that could cause you to perceivably be dead for an unexplainable amount of time. That's just crazy. This is not the end of the story. There's actually quite a bit of lore to this local tragedy and the family burial plot. So those who still live in the area around the Hatcher plot say that they sometimes hear a kitten crying, and every time they go to investigate it, it stops. The same can be said for a woman crying. There's also a mist that only appears in images around Octavia Hatcher's statue, but even when there's not any fog in person. Additionally, it's said that on the anniversary of her death, that Octavia Hatcher's statue will turn away and face the opposite direction than it normally does. Coming in at number 4 is the Witch's Tree. Located at the corner of 6th Street and Park Avenue in Old Louisville, Kentucky, there's an old twisted and knotted tree. But legend has it, that wasn't the original tree that stood there. According to the legend, there used to be a tall maple tree that stood here, and this was the gathering place for a local coven of witches. The townspeople had no problem with these witches. They said that they were fairly unbecoming and quiet, but in 1889, none of that mattered, and the local city commission decided that this tree was going to be cut down for the local May Day festival. Well, of course, the witches were not happy about this. They protested and pleaded and resorted to threatening. And, of course, The townspeople didn't really listen, and the commission just went on with cutting down the tree, leaving only a stump in its place. Well, the witches gave a final and foreboding message: beware the 11th month. And it's really unsure what happened to them after this point. There's no record of them, just simply left with the message: beware the 11th month. And it's said that almost exactly 11 months later, that everything around the stump was destroyed in either a tornado or just excessively high winds. And it's also said that this stump was struck by lightning, and after some time, a tree started to grow there. And that is the tree that stands there today. So from this tall maple tree came this, what's believed to be a type of orange tree in its very distorted form. So this tree still stands there today, and many bring offerings, both locals, visitors, witches, non-witches, some for good luck, but also some just to appease angry witches. In fact, it's said that the entire area around the tree is haunted due to all the deaths in the tuberculosis outbreak around the turn of the century in the early 1900s. Waverly Hills Sanatorium is only about 10 miles from this place, so one can only imagine how many people died in Old Louisville whenever the outbreak finally hit the city. So what do you think about this tree's origin? Was it the results of a threat of a local coven? Was it simply coincidence? Was it accumulation of all the hauntings? Let me know down below in the comment box. I'm interested to see what you have to say. And if you go visit the Witch's Tree in Old Louisville, I would maybe bring an offering. Coming in at number 3 are the Blue People of Kentucky. Did you know that blue people actually existed? Well, they do. They're actually a Kentucky family known as the Fugates, and I'm going to try and be as respectful as I can as I explain this phenomenon. In the early 1800s, Martin Fugate, a French orphan, moved to the area of Troublesome Creek in eastern Kentucky. He was planning to start a family with his new wife, Elizabeth Smith. However, things were a little different for him as his skin turned a deep blue color. Now, some believe that it could have been triggered from chemicals in the area, while others believe that it was just an enzyme deficiency that brought about this rare condition called, bear with me, methemoglobinemia, which causes your skin to turn a deep blue color, your lips turn purple, and your blood turns a chocolate brown color. Well, little did he know that his wife also carried this same genetic mutation recessively. So when they had children, 4 of their 7 children had the same condition as their father. So, while this was not a result of inbreeding, as many think that it started, he was a French orphan and was not related to Elizabeth Smith. He just happened to have some kind of likely deficiency that brought about this rare genetic condition. And surprisingly, his wife also recessively carried this condition. So when they reproduced, over half of their children had this condition. As you can imagine, there was a lot of stigma and discrimination and embarrassment that went with this, especially living in a small rural area. So, they further isolated themselves. And unfortunately, what happens in isolation? Well, you move off to the mountains, glad to be away from all the hate and oppression, only to realize that you have no mating partners. Fortunately, this is what led to intermarrying and interbreeding. Further exacerbating the condition was this family being pushed to isolation. So, while it started with an anomaly and ended up somewhere else, you should know there are blue people in this world. Coming in at number 2 is the Hopkinsville UFO, also known as the Kelly Hopkinsville Encounter. Ever wondered where our image of aliens being little green men with bulbous heads and bulging eyes comes from? Well, it's in part because of this event. Late at night on August 21st, 1955, a large extended farm family called the Suttons arrived at the Hopkinsville police station, terrified, but ready to go on record about what they had experienced. So, earlier that evening, the family had been on their farm, which had no running water, telephone, TV, radio, or even books. Investigators made a point to say that this was the kind of family that wouldn't show up to the police station, but rather just grab their guns and deal with it themselves. But what this family had experienced had all 11 of them at the police station with, quote, hysterical women and children. I mean, one of the men's pulse was measured at 140 beats per minute. And just for reference, an average heartbeat of a healthy adult ranges from 60 to 100 beats per minute, unless you're, exercising or doing strenuous activity. And this guy had 140 beats per minute, even after leaving the encounter and being at the police station. So what had scared this family just so badly? Well, it all started on this hot Sunday afternoon in 1955 when Billy Ray Taylor, who was a family friend, was out back just fetching some water from the family well when he noticed that a silvery object was flying in the sky. He said that it had exhaust of all colors of the rainbow. He said it went past the house only to stop midair and drop to the ground. So he ran inside and told everyone about this. And at this point, the Sutton family was comprised of the 50-year-old matriarch, Glennie Langford, her 2 sons and their wives, her 3 younger children, a brother-in-law, and a friend of Lucky Sutton who was visiting from Pennsylvania, and his wife. So they all laughed it off, said you're just making that up, till about an hour later, they realized that the dogs hadn't stopped barking this entire time. So Billy Ray and Lucky go to the back door to investigate what's going on. And what they see while they're standing at the back door is this eerie, strange glow. And in the midst of the glow, they see a small humanoid creature. It's said that the creature was standing only about 3.5 feet tall, but had an almost perfectly round head and big yellowish glowing eyes. Its arms were so long it almost reached the ground, and it had talons for hands. According to the men, this creature gave off a bright shimmer, despite there being no moonlight because it was a new moon or a dark moon that evening. It's as if its body was made from a silver metal. So the first thing the men do is grab a 20-gauge shotgun and a .22 rifle and start shooting at this creature. Seemingly impervious to their shots, the creature simply just raises its hands as if it's being held at gunpoint, moves closer to them before it flips and disappears into the darkness. But not long after this, a similar creature appeared in a side window. So they started shooting through the window. And still, seemingly impervious to bullets, this creature simply flips and disappears into the dark. So when Miss Glennie Langford saw one of these creatures approaching the front door, she simply knelt next to Billy, who had a weapon. And as she described this creature, she said it was like a 5-gallon gasoline can with a head and little legs, but it shimmered just like the bright metal on her refrigerator. But that's not all that would happen on this August Sunday in 1955. Things certainly escalated when Taylor, the friend visiting from Pennsylvania, stepped out under an overhanging roof when everyone behind him saw a claw-like hand reach down and grab his hair. Frantic and of course screaming, everyone starts pulling Taylor back inside as Lucky starts shooting this creature above the overhang. And as he's shooting at this creature, he sees another one in a nearby tree. And then, apparently, this creature that was on the overhang floats to the ground, does a flip, and disappears into the woods. So at this point, the family is like, we should be staying inside. So for hours, the family stayed inside, listening for any movement at all, occasionally hearing scratches on the roof, until around 11 p.m. when everyone bolted from the house into vehicles and straight booked it to the police station. Family made it to the police station, start giving their reports and sketches of these creatures that they had seen. But what made this encounter just so special? There's actually quite a few reasons that this made national news. And to start, there were 11 witnesses to this encounter, which is quite a lot considering that all of their reports had been very detailed and consistent to everything that had happened that day. Additionally significant to this encounter was the duration. This lasted hours, and the proximity of the creatures to the people. I mean, at one point, Taylor was touched by one of these creatures. To this day, this Kelly Hopkinsville encounter is still one of the most detailed and baffling encounters on record. It's also the encounter that helped shape our national imagery of aliens being little green men with bulbous heads and oversized eyes. So, next time you see a humanoid creature emerging from a strange glow, don't expect bullets to stop it. Coming in at number 1 for our top 10 mysterious stories and spooky places in Kentucky is that of Waverly Hills Sanatorium. Not only is this considered to be one of the most haunted places in Kentucky, but it's considered to be one of the most haunted places in the eastern United States. Originally starting as a one-room schoolhouse built by Major Thomas H. Hayes on land he had bought in 1883, and later named Waverly School by the schoolhouse's teacher, Lizzie Harris. She had named it Waverly School because she was such a big fan of Sir Walter Scott's Waverly novels. But around the turn of the century, there was an outbreak of tuberculosis. For those of you who are unfamiliar, tuberculosis at this point was killing 1 in 7 people who had ever lived. This was a horrible and debilitating, suffering disease that had ravaged the country for about 60 years. So, around the time of the turn of the century, which was the late 1800s, early 1900s, Major Hayes was prompted to sell the property which the school was on to build a tuberculosis clinic because the industrialization of Louisville had made it also a breeding ground for tuberculosis. So on July 26, 1910, the tuberculosis clinic opened up and initially could only house around 40 to 50 patients, but after renovations and expansions had the capacity for over 400. So the facility stayed a tuberculosis clinic from 1910 until 1961 when an antibiotic treatment for tuberculosis was discovered and the clinic was then closed. In 1962, they decided to clean and repurpose this facility and turn it into a nursing home. But by 1982, this facility, Woodhaven Geriatric Center, had been shut down due to so many cases of abuse and neglect. Not to mention, the facility was literally falling apart. So, this property has gone from being a schoolhouse to a tuberculosis clinic to a nursing home. And it's said that anywhere from 7,000 to 65,000 people have died here. And its current owner, Charles Mattingly, claims that he can prove at least 11,000 of those deaths. And while it is nowhere near the 65,000, the high-end number of the people who have died there, that's still a lot of people to die in this one place in such a short amount of time. So it's no surprise while this is considered to be one of the most haunted places in the eastern United States and especially Kentucky. There are endless ghost stories from people who have visited Waverly Hills Sanatorium. It's a variety of things ranging from seeing children playing to seeing a janitor working who died decades earlier to seeing the nurse who hung herself in room 502. And number 502, this room is supposedly the most haunted place in all of Waverly. So, if you're into visiting haunted and spooky places, be sure to add Waverly Hills Sanatorium to your list. While I can't say you'll find me there, if you do decide to go, be prepared. I want to thank you for joining me on this first episode of Kentucky History, Mystery, and Crime. Be sure to look out for upcoming cases to pop up in this section of the Shine with Hine channel. And with that, I'm Sarah Hine with Times Divine. I hope you have a blessed day, and I'll see you later.